We finally get to this one. The second of Odyssey's 2 DLCs. I guess Ubisoft felt obliged to stretch out the live service illusion a little bit more for this game, but unlike First Blade, which was light and boring, Fate of Atlantis is seriously the only reason to play Odyssey in the first place. It is the better DLC by 3 miles, and the developers of it really took their time with this to make something special in the year-ish that they made it happen. It's fresh, challenging, and actually has a story to tell unlike everything else available for this game. So, how did Ubisoft manage to make it right with this one when they failed so many other times, especially when they were trying to charge, I don't know, $200 for the Deluxe edition? The major difference is that Fate of Atlantis actually feels like a legit MMORPG campaign, whereas everything else felt like a sparsely populated action-adventure sandbox with regenerating, meaningless quests. Atlantis has actual region design, which are different than each other. It has interesting, powerful antagonists who aren't just the same old stupid Templar shit. And the plot is simple enough to string along a series of conflicts that Alexios is directly involved with and leads towards completion. You know, personal stakes that a story always needs. Fate of Atlantis is so good and well-paced that it ends up being the potential of Odyssey fulfilled, while the main game was so dull and meandering for business reasons. Obviously, this DLC was made to capitalize on the idea of Atlantis that they teased in the main game, but didn't do anything with until you stumped up the change for this chapter. Alexios returns to the Isu woman that he was talking to a couple of times on his journey, who has drawn him back to complete his destiny. After he goes and gathers some things to gain entry to her hidden keep, I guess that every hero needs to constantly prove their worth for no reason, Alexios meets the Isu woman and is told that he's going to have to endure a grand trial in order to develop into the person who will later save the world with the staff that he had gotten earlier from his father Pythagoras, who went mad under his influence. The Isu woman has created 3 trials by simulation that Alexios will have to face in order to develop the skills to harness the true power of the staff. The first trial takes place in the region of Elysium, heaven for warriors and paradise for its inhabitants. Or so it seems. Early on, Alexios meets with Persephone, Queen of Elysium, who looks down upon her mortal population as weak and misunderstanding of her grand vision for her paradise, one that she fully controls. Alexios learns that his quest in Elysium is simply to leave, but Persephone has a reputation of holding the keys to the gate eternally closed, and has never allowed anyone to leave. Afterwards, he coincidentally runs into one of the souls in Elysium, Adonis, who has a plan to help out Alexios as long as he helps in return. Adonis is actually alive and doesn't want to be in Elysium anymore. He only ended up in here just to seek out his true love, Aphrodite. Persephone keeps Adonis trapped in Elysium along with all the other mortals because she believes that she can provide a better life for them than anywhere else, either in supernatural or natural world. This ideological divide has grown wider as time has gone on, spurred on to action by Adonis himself, who has started a resistance movement against Persephone and will eventually succeed in overthrowing the queen and giving the people the choice to leave. Obviously, the two do not have the power in Elysium, so Alexios will have to go on several quests to gather the strength of the resistance and help out his new buddy. What makes this whole setup work in Atlantis' case is that the missions have an actual context to them. Alexios is now directly involved with getting the resistance rolling and has a personal stake in its success, which ends up making the actual plot important. Plus, the addition of a better story means that the quests don't actually feel like the same old shit, while objectively being part of the same quest types from the main game. A bigger issue in Elysium's case is that for some reason, the destruction of Persephone's power base is a requirement for finishing the chapter, and that's a big issue because the process of doing that is an amazing slog. It requires killing high health, surrounded by enemies' leaders, shooting a bunch of random annoying targets, and defeating several warlords in Elysium's regions. That part of the chapter is incredibly annoying and tedious, but the actual quests, the main quests, are pretty good. You get to try and seduce one of Persephone's closest friends to join the Resistance, you get to poison her fan club, and even recruit your grandfather to help in Adonis' cause while also going on a fishing trip with him. The quests in Atlantis are actually well written and plotted to make for an important and enjoyable story that you want to spend the time in getting through. Plus, you know, the actual addition of interesting characters that actually have character traits and are multidimensional because we meet them more than once actually helps out a goddamn overarching story in MMORPG rather than just constantly running into throwaway NPCs, solving their problem, and then disappearing forever. That's kind of a major difference in whether or not your story is going to suck. The quests even have the classic twists and turns that really any good story should have. Alexios finds that the sway of Persephone is a bit too strong and her iron grip on her power is difficult to say no to, which is why he periodically has to consider his allegiances at the times. And he ends up getting betrayed and even ends up doing some dirty work for Persephone when he's called upon, because he kinda has no choice at that point. He struts the fine line between working for the Resistance and keeping up a polite front when in Persephone's presence. On the other hand, Alexios also has to grapple in each chapter with hunting down Hunter's insights, which are left behind bits of Isu power that Alexios can grab in order to increase his usability of the staff, along with some of his abilities, which is really nice since wielding the power of the gods is a really good tool when Alexios has to contend with some of the new enemies that were added in this chapter. Supernatural and incredibly powerful foes, kind of annoying in large numbers. These guys are the true challenges, with even one Colossi proving quite a challenge for Alexios to defeat, rather than the copy-pasted buffoons of the main game that you could immediately defeat an hour in. Sometimes they can actually be a bit much for the player to be forced to dealing with actually develops into them developing some goddamn tactics, doing some stealth, and actually, I don't know, playing a game like it's an actual fucking game rather than just a fucking conveyor belt of nonsense. But I still do respect that Odyssey made this much needed addition to their game to freshen up the combat, even if it is still kind of unwieldy and inefficient. Some of these enemies even have the ability to steal away Alexios' superpower gauge, which makes their fights some of the biggest hassles even when he is actually forced to fight them. The whole thing is not impossible by any means, but they can still be right asses when they want to be, if you end up getting in the frickin' screwed over corner a bit too much. After his rabble-rousing, Adonis begins his distract and strike plan with his followers, and does manage to catch Persephone slightly off guard. Hermes comes down to duel with Alexios, who he easily trounces because Hermes is a giant pussy. If you want to know about him, because he's kind of unimportant to the story, Hermes is a deluded obsessor over Persephone, who's been helping Alexios learn about Elysium and his connection to the staff, along with unwittingly giving him a couple clues that eventually helped out the Resistance in their ultimate victory. At the end of the day, he's a pathetic pushover who can barely give Alexios a decent challenge. He's not challenging in combat, they just gave him an insane health pool. However, once Alexios does come to her palace demanding the keys to the gates, Persephone tosses him a bit of a monkey wrench, facing her guard dog, who ends up being Cerberus disguised as her lapdog. This is another great thing about Atlantis, is that it gives you a few unique boss encounters that are designed specifically for the DLC, rather than just being a simple cast of copy-paste. You know, a bunch of humans that you'll eventually forget about because they're kind of all similar to each other. The bosses in Atlantis are legitimate challenges and memorable characters representing the mythology that they're from in Alexios' story towards understanding the Isu secrets. It's all good stuff and an appreciated addition to what was a lacking formula. After dishing out a defeat to the classic underworld guardian, Alexios begins his second trial on a bit of a sour foot. Hades appears before Alexios in order to chide him for killing Cerberus. Now, he has quite a problem. Without Cerberus, Hades is unprotected, and the forces within and outside now have an open door to do whatever they wish with the underworld. On the spot, Hades forces Alexios to help him figure out this problem by withholding special knowledge about the staff that only he can hand out to the mercenary. Alexios' forced mission is to recruit 4 new guardians to hold the gates of Hades closed, and along with finding another set of keeper insights, this is kind of the entire story of the Hades chapter. However, go a little bit further, and you'll also find that there's a set of old mercenary targets from the main game that got sent down to Hades, and you'll have another chance to deal with them, making for another hunt down quest that will make a most of the desolate Hades world. All of these cleaning up quests were duly provided to Alexios by Charon, who's been having his own problems ever since the world of Hades has lost its protectorate, which he soon complains to Alexios about and hands him a bunch of problems that he can't be arsed to figure out himself. The main one being the invasion of Tartarus. Tartarus being the really scummy part of Hades where all the bad people are sent to because they're being bad. However, now that Hades has lost control of itself, they've started to invade Hades through portals that Alexios is tasked with keeping shut. In order to do so, he has to fight a wave of them in order to close the portal. After a first couple required shutdowns, these portals are largely optional, and another example of Ubisoft just shoving in stupid collectible bullshit to flesh out their game. But this also comes with an additional problem. In order to track down Hades' new protectors, he has to pierce the Veil of Tartarus, which mortals just can't do. To bypass this problem, Alexios has to hunt down the pieces of the armor of the Fallen held by the reincarnated mercenaries that I mentioned earlier. This whole multi-pronged checklist of the Hades chapter is a pretty good idea for the setting, since it gives you that opportunity to face down a whole slew of interesting antagonists, some actual challenges, explore the area, and get into some of the side content along the way regarding the unique situation where Alexios gets to encounter people who have died in the main game and help them reach some sort of closure, all under that umbrella of Hades, who is conniving and manipulating Alexios just long enough to get what he wants out of this whole deal. While the objectives might make this chapter feel directionless since it lacks the concreteness of Elysium's plotline, Hades as a location makes up for it by it being an interesting setting filled with the concept of death and an interesting difference made in Tartarus' inclusion. The craven hole of scumbags who is deliberately menacing and towering over the entire region around it. Being almost impenetrable by design for exploration makes it even more desired and mysterious for the players. It gives it a mystique that not much else in Odyssey can really muster because it wasn't copy-pasted 15 times. And of course, after pushing the mercenaries back into their holes, getting the armor pieces and telling Stentor to shut the fuck up, Alexios arrives to receive his just compensation, only to be told, in classic god fashion, that he's been a pawn in this game the entire time and now has to submit to being the 5th guardian. Obviously, because he's a Ubisoft character, Alexios tells Hades to fuck off and begins a fistfight with the God of Death, which is a creative encounter at least. You don't get to fight with every god in this story, and as a trickster, Hades pulls out a few tricks to use on Alexios that makes the combat with him satisfying to figure out, because you kinda need tactics again, it's not just dumping numbers into a number bucket. And honestly, it's kind of annoying that you don't ultimately get to pull out a Kratos on Hades and eventually feel like the ultimate badass. The fight gets intervened on by Poseidon, brother of Hades, and he beckons Alexios onto the 3rd chapter of Fate of Atlantis, upon which he actually gets to visit Atlantis and gets some sort of reward for going through all of this nonsense dealing with the spoiled rich kid gods of Persephone and Hades who frankly deserve each other after this bullshit sandwich. Poseidon, conversely, welcomes Alexios to Atlantis with open arms, allows him the opportunity to see Atlantis in its purest form before it was destroyed by idiocy. Poseidon wants to extend an invitation to Alexios to help him out with his problems. Poseidon has been impressed with Alexios since he's been observing his entire journey in order to win a petty bet against Hades. Since he's so filled with admiration for Alexios, Poseidon wants to grant him the chance to fill a prestigious role in Atlantean society, becoming its ultimate judge. Poseidon wants to give Alexios the responsibility to oversee Atlantean society and help him cast judgment on some of its leading class, and help him decide Atlantis' fate at the same time. Contrary to how it looks from here, Atlantis is actually in a bad spot. Atlantis has been going through a Dark Souls-style cycle of being destroyed and rebuilt through Isu means, each time hoping that it can finally approach the utopian dream of its creators. This cycle is approaching its final days now, and Poseidon is considering just wiping the whole thing clean and starting again from scratch, or just destroying it entirely and not giving a fuck. Alexios eagerly accepts the job from Poseidon and is given a series of quests to supervise and decide upon some sections of Atlantean life, namely regional judges who he thinks are subverting Atlantean society. This is the first major content push of this Atlantis chapter, since it sends Alexios to each corner of Atlantis to learn more about the internal conflicts going on, and how Alexios can help to understand and possibly fix and conclude the whole mess. The entire premise of the Atlantis chapter is frankly brilliant, because it gives Alexios a direct personal stake in exploring and understanding the region. He actually has a legitimate responsibility to figure out and explore Atlantis because he wants to do so. This drives him to do all of the things and speak to all of the people more thoughtfully, absorb the plot a bit more, since he's the one put in charge of the future of this whole society, directly underneath its one king. The exploration gives the player quests, and because of the premise, makes each quest directly connected to Alexios, because nominally, everything that you can do in quests will improve Atlantis by design. Plus, each of the judges' problems are unique and intriguing, since the godly views over the mortals they govern makes for more complex moral questions, as each judge tries to use a different tactic to improve in their own ways. And they in general don't really understand that they're looking over mortals, they have access to all of this technology that they don't, and just really don't understand how humans can live that way, so you get to see two perspectives of the whole same thing. One of the judges is a spectacle creator, one of the judges is a doctor, and the other one I forgot about. Through the interaction, you get to see the underlying conflict in more detail as you understand that the society is more and more inherently corrupt than it seems, and standing against the law that Poseidon put in place that banned human experimentation with Isu devices, claiming that godly powers should not be used on mortals, which is another ideological divide pitting human well-being against human evolution. A story that we've seen before, but here it's still a clever enough of a plot point to make the chapter special in spite of some of the later characters being the typical stupidly obvious evil person a la Deimos from the main game's bad ending. After casting judgment on the three judges, Alexios has actually put some of his pride into being Atlantis' real judge, and this coincidentally attracts someone else to tell Alexios of his woes. Some random kid has lost his parents, and this is Alexios' next main mission to tackle. He has to go to where the two parents both worked and talk to their employers, who are surprisingly dismissive of their disappearance. They barely care to even give Alexios basic information as to their whereabouts, which again shows the class divide in this society between immortal and mortal. And Alexios also gets the chance to knock some heads together because they're being a bunch of fuckos. Further on, he goes on a separate mission to help out a local investigation into a crime scene, which leads back to some random mortal woman who's been implicated in the murder. Apparently, she's some sort of werewolf having snuck into Atlantis and unfortunately has to be dealt with, since she can't handle her Mr. Hyde and is an obvious danger to society. Trust me, this may seem random, but it'll actually come back in a later mission. After tracking down some more leads, Alexios finds that this mystery goes up the societal stairs more than he thought it would, and eventually bumbles his way into discovering a hidden science bunker in Atlantis that may have have the ends that he's been searching for. It's revealed here that one of the Isu workings in Atlantis has not only been defying Poseidon's rules, but flagrantly ripping them in half. Alexios discovers holding pens for many mortals from Atlantis there, including the two missing parents being held for hideous modification experiments to try and forcibly evolve the species. This guy in his bunker created the werewolf from earlier along with all of the mythical beasts that you fight in the main game. The Sphinx, the Minotaur, the Cyclopses, and the Writhing Dead, along with one more despicable creature of legend that will serve as the final battle. In order to try and save his own ass, the Isu running the lab offers Alexios an intriguing deal in exchange for forgetting the caged humans entirely. He can see what's behind curtain number 3, which he totally promises is a huge development in human evolution for Alexios specifically. The ploy is honestly so badly written that I obviously didn't take it, and I frankly can't imagine a lot of people doing so. The guy offering it is as suspect as they come, and he's offering no legitimate assurance that the secret is bullshit, mainly because the con to taking it is the humans being locked underground and eventually killed. I actually did see the other choice later when I was writing the script and found out that the secret he was hiding behind the curtain was that he decided to clone Alexios 100 times in order to get the benefits of his Isu human body traits since they are so unique. So surprisingly, that Isu guy who was amazingly evil was actually telling the truth. Having finished the entire investigation that he was tasked with, Alexios returns to report it to Poseidon, who obviously takes great offense at the actions of the other Isu. The other Isu arrive to defend themselves against Poseidon's defense of the humans by claiming that they're fighting for the future. What makes it worse is that another Isu actually backs the mad scientist up and says that it is for the greater good that he's allowed to do all of this and make, I don't know, unlimited Cyclopses because that's the future of the human race. He's made advances while Poseidon has been stagnating and sitting on his ass. Unfortunately, the pair wanted to make their point known, so they released their final creation into Atlantis. The Hecatoncheires, which for those who don't know, is the mythical 100-handed monster from the Bible that is now terrorizing some random pit under Atlantis? Alexios now has to go down there and make sure that it's no longer a threat to anyone in a ridiculously drawn-out boss fight. The Hecatoncheires is a crazy long battle with the monster, dishing out huge poison damage, being able to control much of the battlefield through his crowd control, and he simply just has one of the largest health pools in the entire game. This boss fight took so long that the original character design on the creature really lost its luster halfway through the first attempt. It probably would have been the capper this DLC needed if we weren't fighting it in a random pit where Atlantis stores dead bodies. After Alexios returns victorious and the two Isu that defied Poseidon are now facing their consequences, Poseidon tells Alexios that he's finally reached his decision. He intends to destroy Atlantis because humans could never be able to resist the temptation and destruction of the Isu technology that they were working with. It simply isn't worth the risk, and so Alexios relinquishes one of his Isu devices in order to throw the self-destruct switch and throw Atlantis into the sea. The finale of the last simulation finally brings what Alexios was adventuring for: perspective. The Isu woman that created these journeys does a final plot dump to tell the audience what the point of it all was. To expose Alexios to different ways that rulers of folly can fail to accomplish their grand visions. Elysium was ruled by strict order, and Hades by ultimate anarchy and chaos. Atlantis was ruled by a single contradiction, innovating for the future while trying to preserve today forever. Alexios went on a journey that she tried earlier in her life when Atlantis was fine, and she too failed to balance both halves of the argument, and that led to Atlantis' ultimate destruction. Now that the simulations have been fully settled and the knowledge has been attained, Alexios can become the person to guard the staff and finally deliver it to framing device lady in the future successfully. But, as the classic saying goes, it's not the destination, it's the journey. Fate of Atlantis, in its 3 chapters, accomplishes something that the main game couldn't do in 80 hours. Being a legitimate MMORPG, this DLC delivers on the things that the main game was missing entirely. Special conflicts to get involved with, creative regions to explore with their own architecture, characters, and landscapes, an intriguing quest line to get involved with on a personal level to end the conflicts in those regions, satisfying enemies to fight against, and above all, just a good story to ponder about throughout the entire DLC. It's got the proper premises to string things along, a well-paced set of interesting quests in order to accomplish a personal goal of the main character, because he's directly slotted into every aspect of every chapter. The DLC has everything that a MMORPG really needed. Some parts can be pretty hard slog, such as Elysium's faction requirements and some of the new enemies being right asses in combat, but overall, I don't really have any major complaints. Fate of Atlantis is really the only good thing that Odyssey has to offer, and it finally managed to do the supernatural questing area that Origins tried to add in the correct way. The DLC had twists, drama, and some actual passion behind its creation, and I would highly recommend it to people who have a copy of Odyssey already. Otherwise, while Fate is fantastic, it's still not good enough to have to put up with the dull as driftwood main title. I can't even recommend it at a low price because the main game will still eat up 60 hours of your free time on a trip that goes nowhere. It's just a shame that the main quest had to be so terribly executed because Fate of Atlantis is a legitimately intriguing journey, but in this real world of ours, this great set of chapters is stapled to a dead pig and attempting to be sold at premium prices in 3 ways. Again, if you invested in Odyssey, Fate of Atlantis is a no-brainer. To everyone else, go very, very far away from it and enjoy The Witcher 3 instead, that tried to do the shit and actually did it correctly in every release of itself. Thank you for watching, and I'll put up the final scoreboard for these fun times, and I'll see you around when we look at our next game in the backlog monologue, I guess.